Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar today. My name is Katie. I am an application engineer with the ETIS Foundation, or what we call SimCore, part of the NIH sparc consortium. So in this webinar, we'll be introducing o²S²PARC, which is an interactive online platform for computational modeling and data analysis. And the acronym is Open Online Simulations for Spark. And we love acronyms so much that we wanted to embed two acronyms in one. So we have the sparc acronym inside. So what does that actually stand for? Well, the sparc program is an NIH-funded program that's looking to accelerate progress in medicine through the use of electrical stimulation of the nervous system. Now, some examples of devices that do that are vagus nerve stimulators for hypertension and sacral nerve stimulation for bladder control. But there are quite a few challenges in developing devices like this, one of which is identifying the nerve target, then developing the devices themselves, and some of them are also figuring out how this nerve stimulation affects the different organs in the end, and about how changing that organ function can help treat different diseases that you might have. While we originally developed o²S²PARC for Spark, we're now opening this platform to everyone because we think that it offers some advantages for many different types of users. The benefits that we're thinking of include modularization, sharing, and execution of software and code directly from your browser. We provide quite a few resources, such as the Jupyter Lab, some numerical solvers, 3D anatomical models, and of course, since it's all cloud-based, we have computational power. We originally developed o²S²PARC for Spark, but now we're opening this platform for everyone because of the numerous advantages. And in the end, what we want to do is make your projects both shareable and reproducible by other people, or even yourself at a later point in time. This is a quick look at our agenda, what I really want to cover today. The first is the concept of o²S²PARC, so how and why we made it. Next is the overview of the o²S²PARC interface and a bit of terminology and the components of o²S²PARC. Then we'll focus in on one very particular component of o²S²PARC called the Jupyter Lab. Some of you might have used Jupyter Labs in the past, and we have it integrated into o²S²PARC, and we think it's useful enough to just mention it a bit. And we'll go over through a few of the most useful features that we think you could take advantage of on o²S²PARC and certain applications that you could have while using the platform. And finally, we'll go through some Q&A if you have any questions, any feedback for us. Right, so jumping right into it, our concept. What we really want to do is make things modular. This is one of the very key aspects of o²S²PARC. Now, if you take a look at these shapes on the left, they're not inherently compatible with each other. Like, it would be very difficult for you to stack up a circle, a diamond, and this flattened hexagon thingy. So what we aim to do is put them into these boxes. Once you have them all in boxes, then you can stack them up and create something wonderful. Now, what does this mean in terms of o²S²PARC? So these little shapes that we had originally are really these data or software or code from different environments. And these things may not be very compatible with each other. But once we package them, they turn into these reusable modules, what we call services. And with these services, we can chain them up together into these kinds of pipelines. And this whole pipeline is something that we call a study on o²S²PARC. Now, I really want to emphasize this terminology because we are going to be using that later on in the presentation. So first, a study is a project on o²S²PARC that consists of one or more connected services. And a service itself is a piece of code or even a full-on application that can be used as a building block for a study. And what is one example in which this might be useful? So imagine that we have someone who wants to do, for example, statistical analysis on food images on their Instagram feed. Now, this person looks around on the internet and finds some code on GitHub that'll pull images from Instagram for them. But if they look a little closer, well, this code was programmed in Python, which the user doesn't use. And on top of that, it requires a long list of Python packages to be installed before they can even run that code. But our user here has their statistical analysis written in R. So how do we solve this? Using o²S²PARC, that user's data analysis in R is packaged along with their computer environment. So that includes the software that they're using, as well as the operating system of their computer. And that altogether is packaged into one of these o²S²PARC services. The service is then saved on the cloud with, for example, a lot of code from other users, and also something called a Docker image, which contains also the environment of code itself. And the o²S²PARC platform even is hosted on AWS, Amazon Web Services. Once all of this is on the cloud, the o²S²PARC platform can pull up different services. We have something that we call a catalog, which, as a normal catalog does, organizes all of these services and knows where all of them are inside of our database. That can be pulled on the web platform to build up your different pipelines. And not just this, but once these services are in o²S²PARC, they can be shared with bunches of other users who may also want to do some statistical analysis on their Instagram feeds. So now we'll go through a bit of introduction on what the o²S²PARC platform really looks like. I've kind of given you an idea of what we're trying to do, but what is something a little bit more concrete? How does this actually look? Well, the login page is on o²SparC.io. It's pretty straightforward. And once you have an account and have logged in, the first thing you're going to see is the dashboard. And the dashboard is basically your homepage on o²SparC. There are a few elements that I want to go over here. The first thing is the dashboard button. This is going to be visible on every single page on o²SparC. And using that button, you can come back to this page here. Second, we have the dashboard tabs. Right now we're in the studies tab, and the studies tab is where you can find all of the studies that you have saved on o²SparC. Next are the study options. So the box 3, we have options for every single study. So each box here, each tile is what we call a study card, and every single card is going to have a list of options. Some of these options include sharing it with other o²SparC users, or even exporting it to download on your local computer. Imagine we entered one of these studies, and you do that by just clicking a study card. What we see is the study specific interface. And again, what we have is the dashboard button up on the top. So if we want to go back to the page with all of our studies, we can click that. On the left-hand side, we have all sorts of information that is pertinent to the study itself. We have the list of services that are included. We have the study information, so metadata about the study. Now, if you created this study, you would be the one populating this. If you copied it from somewhere else, then the metadata would be following the study. Then on the bottom, we have the logger, which will tell you information about the run status of your study pipeline. Now, on the top right-hand corner, we have the run and stop buttons, and this is how you can execute or stop the execution of your study pipeline. Number 4 is the study workspace, and this is where you're going to be building up your pipeline. This is the main interface of a study. And 5 here is basically telling you this is a single service within this multi-service study. And to enter into the specific user interface of a service, you can double click that. imagine that we just double clicked on this particular service. Then we would enter into that service GUI. There are just a couple of elements that I want to emphasize here. And first of all are the connected inputs, which is in block 1, and the outputs on block 4. And these are really important for o²SPARC. This is how we make everything modular and interoperable. But when we chain these services together, each one will have an input and an output, and that is how they communicate with each other. And that's how we can make sure that all of these different applications or pieces of code can be interoperable with each other. In the middle is the service specific interface, and this is going to vary a lot depending on what the service contains. Here, what we have is a special viewer for this particular study pipeline. It shows a plot, and this is based on some of the inputs that were provided from a previous service. If we look back on the previous slide, we can see what was connected, and we have a cardiac model connected, and that is what's injecting inputs into this viewer. And on the right-hand side, this service is creating some outputs based on those inputs. And this can, of course, be connected to other services downstream. There are two types of services on o²SPARC. One is a computational service, and one is what we call an interactive service. They're pretty self-explanatory. The computational type of service has a very basic GUI. It's essentially just a list of parameters that you can adjust. In the previous study, we had a service that was purely computational, and here you get a list of the different parameters that you can adjust. And these can be integers or strings or files. They can really embody a lot of things, but the main thing about computational services is that after you set these parameters, it runs without any kind of user interaction until that whole process is completed. Another key element about computational services is that they can be used with the o²SPARC Python API, which I'll get to a little bit later in the presentation. And one of the examples is a Python runner service, which will take in a piece of Python code and a list of requirements to run that Python code. And most custom computational models will also be computational services. Interactive services, on the other hand, can have a much more complicated GUI, and they can even encapsulate an entire application. Now, of course, you don't have to interact with it, but this is really how you're going to get the most out of an interactive service. They cannot, however, be used with the API because the service can't guess how you're going to want to interact with it. And one example of such a service is this DSI Studio application that you see here. And it's a tool that maps brain connections, and you can view different things and adjust your views directly through the application interface. But just notice on the very top that we still have an input files parameter. So this still allows the entire application to be compatible with other services on o²SPARC. And as I said, we want to put a little bit of emphasis on Jupyter Lab because it has been particularly useful, for example, for AI applications. And the reason why that it can be useful for such a thing is that it contains not only files, but also a development environment. And this is particularly good for coders, but it can also hold, for example, markdown files, which are more of a documentation type. And you can install new kernels for whatever programming language that you prefer. On the left here, we see that this particular Jupyter Lab has a Python kernel, so where you can write Python code, and also an Octave kernel where you can use Octave code, which is an open source version of MATLAB, if that's something that you prefer. But Jupyter Labs have the flexibility to incorporate all types of kernels, so we can work with you to to install the kernels that are going to be the tools that you use. Jupyter notebooks here are half code and half documentation. And this is also extremely useful for presenting data to other people. So presenting code or plots, or you want to demonstrate something to somebody else. We have a few extra add-ons to these Jupyter Labs. For example, we have Git integration, and that allows you to access your Git repositories directly from the Jupyter Lab on o²SPARC. We also have a terminal, which allows you to do file management and basic operations that might be annoying to do by hand. Here we just want to show what it's like to be using a Jupyter Lab on o²SPARC. Here on the left, we have a list of files, and you can have your own file browser for that. Here we're opening a Jupyter notebook. And this is actually one example that you can access on o²SPARC right now. It's the Spark port example, and it shows quite a few things such as some HTML so that you can control the formatting. It has LaTeX, which renders very nice formulas. And also it contains some code that can generate plots or tables. So this is just one example of usage on o²SPARC. We have several Jupyter Lab flavors, as we call them, on o²SPARC, each of which contain a different pre-installed environment for you. The first is the Jupyter Math, which contains Octave, Python, and pre-installed Python data analysis packages. And that's the one that that's the one we had shown earlier in the image. The Jupyter Neuron is the one that you just saw a video of. And this contains not only the Python data analysis packages, but also Neuron packages for modeling and also for data analysis. This one was in particular developed for Spark users. And lastly, we have the Jupyter Phoenix, which contains open source computing tools for solving partial differential equations, part of the Phoenix project. And as I was creating this presentation, I came across one fun fact about what Phoenix stands for. FE representing finite element, CS representing computational software, and the NI is just there because it sits nicely in the middle. So o²SPARC is not the worst when it comes to loving acronyms, apparently. Now that we took a look at the user interface, I wanted to go over some useful features of o²SPARC that you could perhaps take advantage of. One, the first thing is the sharing of studies. We have two options for sharing studies. One is sharing a study instance, and one is publishing a study as a template. Now, the first kind is sharing one specific study, and the other one is allowing others to make copies. So templates are a very specific kind of study. They can be copied and adapted while the original template stays the same. And this idea is very similar to a Git clone for those of you who use Git. In both cases, all the users who have a study shared with them will have access to that study. The main difference really comes down to what happens when one user changes something. Now, if a study instance is shared and one user changes that study somehow, then that study is changed for everyone who has it shared. If instead a study template is published, users with whom the template is shared can each make their own copy of that template. When one user modifies their copy of that template, it doesn't actually change anyone else's copy. So examples for when you might want to choose one thing over the other is that when you're collaborating on a code project with other people, for example, then sharing the study instance could be the most useful. But if you're trying to show a demonstration to your friends or your family or your pets, and you want them to be able to adapt the demonstration for themselves, then you might want to publish a template and have them copy from that template. On o²SPARC, here is how mechanically you would actually share. When you go to the study options, you can choose who you want to share with from a list. And now I have a lot of people on my list. You may not have as many when you first log on. And what's very special about sharing is that you can also choose what access rights that they have. So you can make them the owner, which would allow them also to delete it, or you can allow them to modify all of the components of your study. Now, publishing as a template works very similarly. You would still go to the study options and then click publish as a template. And you can publish either to yourself or for other people. And same as for sharing in a study instance, you can choose the access rights as well. One of the other advantages of o²SPARC that you might want to take advantage of is that we have a huge catalog of services already there for you. And these services can span really quite a lot. It can be as simple as just a script, or it can encapsulate an entire software application. Some examples are the tractography mapping application that I showed you earlier, DSI Studio. We also have 3D CAD model viewers, which you can see that are showing different, one anatomical model and one nerve model. And another example is the Jupyter Lab that I had mentioned earlier, which you can use for prototyping code. And we also have a 2D plotting tool for making pretty plots. And finally, of course, we have these computational services that look very, very simple, but under the hood, they can have a full computational model of, for example, a heart function. And this can be boxed up and used by anyone who just wants to change a couple of the parameters and then rerun that whole model. We have here a catalog of templates as well. These can be accessed in the Discover tab of your dashboard. So when you log in, you're in the dashboard, and by default, you'll be in the Studies tab. If you click on the Discover tab, you'll be able to access our catalog of templates. And as I mentioned before about templates, these are full-on studies that you can make a copy of and modify for yourself. And clicking one of these tiles is going to make that copy for you. Once you click one of the templates, it's going to create a new study in your Studies tab with the same name and have that copied for you, and you can edit it for yourself. Inside that template catalog, we have two particular ones that I want to highlight, and both of these are Jupyter Lab demonstrations available to all o²SPARC users. These come preloaded with published Spark datasets, and the two that we have here are from Professor Warren Grill and Professor Million Mulugeta, and they both contain sampled formatted reports in Markdown that include code for data analysis, HTML for formatting, and also Python widgets that allow you to do interactive plotting. So it's just a very good demonstration of what Jupyter Lab can do. And you can access this directly through o²SPARC or through the Spark portal for those of you who are Spark users. One application that we have is running o²SPARC through Python scripts. And for that, we created the o²SPARC API. The o²SPARC API can be used to execute any published computational service. And it's very easy to install the Python client. You just do a pip install for Python users. And this is really useful because you can run jobs on o²SPARC without accessing the web platform at all. One example piece of usage is using our Python runner service. As I mentioned, the Python runner takes inputs of a Python script or multiple scripts and a requirements file. And then it runs the code directly on o²SPARC. And the main reason you might want to use this is that it gives you the advantage of cloud computational resources, and you don't have to set that up for yourself. So you don't have to be an expert on AWS to take advantage of these cloud computational resources. You can access this actually just through o²SPARC. And the final feature of o²SPARC that you might find useful is guided mode. The o²SPARC API that I mentioned is really for kind of super users of o²SPARC, but we want to also make o²SPARC accessible by people from all different backgrounds. And one way that we do this is through the guided mode. Here we see something that's a lot like a slideshow view. On the very top, we have these 2 slides that you can go to, and you can set that up for any pipeline. The pipeline originally looks like these 4 services, but it's could be very difficult for someone who is just entering o²SPARC to deal with all of the user interface. So what we have instead is this guided mode, which allows you to just run through 2 different services back to back with a previous and next button, and then that'll allow you to access the different service interfaces without going through the whole pipeline view. And now, finally, we want to get to some applications. Who can use o²SPARC and how you might want to be using it. Of course, since we developed o²SPARC originally for Spark researchers, there are a lot of benefits for Spark researchers. First, we give you access to predefined workflows that are contributed by other members of Spark and who are experts in their field. Next, we provide some valuable tools such as simulators or anatomical models that you can use in your research projects. We enable shareable and reproducible computational modeling through the sharing features, and also having everything located on the cloud platform itself, and you don't have to worry about duplicating your own computer environment, your OS, or your software installations. Next, you can enhance your paper or your grant application with interactive demonstrations. We've had several groups already who have contributed to o²SPARC and given access to paper reviewers. Finally, if you are a Spark user and you have a Pensieve account, then Spark data can be directly accessible on o²SPARC for use in your study pipelines, for example, for data analysis, if you connect your Pensieve account on o²SPARC. You have several benefits for those of you who are interested in AI or machine learning. And some of these are running your code through cloud resources through either the GUI or through the o²SPARC API. Jupyter Lab services with Git integration and pre-installed Python packages allow you to do data science and data analysis directly on o²SPARC. So you have the whole environment set up already for you. Then once you have all of this on the cloud, that means that your projects can be accessible from anywhere and executable from any computer that has a browser. All you have to do is log into your o²SPARC account. And again, this avoids any kind of installation or system environment concerns, which could be annoying if you want to be using your code on different machines. One other application that we thought of is for teaching applications. So some of the features of o²SPARC that could be beneficial for both teachers and students are that studies are shareable. They're shareable both as a study instance or publishing as a template. And these can be useful for example, submitting assignments or distributing lesson materials. We have a consistent work environment on o²SPARC, and this doesn't rely on installations on a student or instructor's private computer. and there wouldn't be any differences in computer hardware. All you have to have is a browser. And with Jupyter Labs, we have the possibility to host and execute code in all of the most popular programming languages. So no matter what you want to be teaching in, we can make a Jupyter Lab with the kernels that you need. And if I haven't sold you yet, you're not sure that you want to have an o²SPARC account, or you're just kind of browsing to see what's there, we have a special sampler portion. If you go to the Spark portal, which is at sparc.science, we can access a whole bunch of different templates that are already published, and you can run them through o²SPARC without having an o²SPARC account. And that's what you see on the right side. When you go through the Spark portal, you can run a simulation in the simulation data sets, and that'll create what we call an anonymous user for you. Over here, it's just a random string of gibberish, and that is the temporary user that we create for you. So you don't even need an o²SPARC account to start looking through o²SPARC. And this allows you to explore some Spark data, some Spark submissions, without being an expert on what that study was from. And one example here is the anatomical model viewer. So it's a 3D viewer where you can browse and look around, click, drag, rotate a human model. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. I just want to give you a few helpful links and then open up the floor for questions. Here are some resources that you might find helpful. If I have really sold you on o²SPARC and you don't have an account already, then you can email support@o²SPARC.io to get an account on o²SPARC. Our documentation can be found at docs.o²SPARC.io. And this is where you can get some more detailed information on everything that I presented to you today. If you're really ambitious, you can look in our open source code repository on GitHub and submit bugs or feature requests as well. And I mentioned quite a lot of topics, but very briefly today. On our YouTube channel, I have gone into many of these topics in much further detail. So you can go to our YouTube channel and then look at the different YouTube videos that we have pre-uploaded. You can also find contributions from other Spark members as well on our YouTube channel. And with that, I will open it up to questions. Thank you again for attending today. And yeah, let me know if there's anything that you would be interested in learning more about. Thank you all. Oh,
hi. This is Rick Gray from the FDA. I have a question for you.
Yeah, sure.
So I happen to be a cardiac electrophysiologist and do modeling, and so I recognized a lot of the slides you were showing. Mm-hmm. Have you done any verification in that for example, take output from Spark and compare it to independent simulations to see how the results compare?
Yeah, that's actually a very important question. We at SimCore, we don't really do the creation of models or the validation of them. This is something that we rely on the community to do. So, but what we do have provided, and which is something that we want to emphasize more for later submissions, is something what we call the 10 simple rules. And this kind of forces contributors to assess themselves how validated their models are, how much documentation that they have. And this is something that people can use to judge at what capacity they can be trusting a model that's submitted onto o²SPARC. But us, from the SimCore side, our job is to create this platform to host everyone's models to host their data analysis pipelines, as opposed to doing the research ourselves.
Okay, that's fair, especially for validation. Let's put off that for the side. But verification, I hope you feel some responsibility that your code is doing what it claims to do. I mean, if none of these are your own solvers, then I kind of guess you don't need to do that. But it does seem like there's some responsibility on your part to make sure the pieces fit together and that your output, what you've done, is reliable and robust.
Sure. So there's definitely a long way to go to that for it to be completely verified. Some aspects that we're putting into place are, for example, unit matching between inputs and outputs. Another aspect that we have is integration checks. When we import a model, we ask the submitter to give us validation data so that we can run their model and make sure that we're at least getting the same outputs that they're expecting.
Excellent. Thank you. That provides a bit of comfort. CellML also does some unit checking. Do you do any kind of unit checking to make sure that the computations are appropriate?
So we have unit checking for kind of ourselves, but we don't write unit tests for the code that is submitted to us, because that would be a level of curation that we cannot sustain at the moment, at least. But we do check, for example, that the input and output files, for example, are what we expect. So as I said, we require validation data from the submitter. So we check. So the unit test would be something like, do the input names match what you want? Do the output names, if they're file outputs, are those actually generated? And from a system perspective, we have port checks. So if something is expecting a file as an input, then you can't be linking an integer to something that's a file input. So that kind of checking that we do, but we don't write our own checks for that specific code submission.
Great. Thank you for the great talk and the great tool. And just a thought as you move forward, FDA, when we're looking at submissions, they use anything, we want to see documentation for that verification.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if you provide that to your users down the line, that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Katie. This is Ranjana. Very nice presentation. I just had a quick question.
Yeah.
Does o²S²PARC support HPC's parallel computing?
Right. So this is something that I would say is not there quite yet, but something that we're actively working towards. I mentioned a difference between computational and interactive services. Computational ones can theoretically be parallelized. They're made for that. Like, this is something that we thought of way back when we were creating the platform to begin with. And what we want to be able to do is well, of course, parallelize the processes and make it so that you can assign these jobs to different resources. For now, we don't have this completely implemented, but this is something that we want to have in the coming months.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, then just want to thank you all for your time. And if you're interested in Spark developments, you can also, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is what's linked down here, bit.ly/Spark videos, and that'll link you to our sparc.science YouTube page. So thank you very much. Stop sharing my screen. And have a great day, afternoon, evening, wherever in the world that you are. I'm here in Zurich, but I see a bunch of you that are collaborators from all over the world. So thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.